Hello, it's Miss Bell. So this unit is on ecology. So ecology is something that every human is involved with. And what ecology basically is going to be your interactions between humans or other organisms and their environment, and also interactions between two different types of organisms. So, first thing, we need to review some terms. So the first one is going to be producers. Producers are another word for autotrophs. So producers are organisms that usually use energy directly from the sun to produce their own food. Okay, and that's usually through photosynthesis, but there is chemosynthesis. Okay, so don't forget about chemosynthesis. So chemosynthesis is going to use chemicals to make their own food. Okay, so these organisms do not depend on other organisms for energy. These producers or autotrophs, they automatically make their own food. So producers are organisms that go through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis to make their own food, to make glucose. So photosynthesis, of course, is going to use sunlight, and chemosynthesis is going to use chemicals. And so hopefully that's a refresher on you from a prior unit. Another thing that's hopefully a refresher is that the sun is the ultimate source for most life on Earth. That's where most things are photosynthetic that are producers, and so they get their energy from the sun. But actually, less than 1% of the sun's energy that gets to the earth is used by living things. A lot of it is absorbed into non-living things or reflected back. And most of the sun's energy never even reaches Earth because of the ozone layer is protecting us, and that's a good thing. So here is just showing you a photosynthetic food chain, how the sunlight goes into the plant, and then the plant's energy goes into the sunlight goes into the plant, then the plant's energy goes into the herbivore, then into the carnivore. And this is showing you a chemosynthetic food chain, where this is a hydrothermal vent, and it's going to give off all these chemicals, and these organisms are going to make sulfides and make their own food, bacteria, and then they're going to get eaten by usually a carnivore. So usually it's going to be bacteria living near those hydrothermal vents, which are at the bottom of the ocean where there is no sunlight. And so they would be the base of the food chain there where there's no sunlight. And then something is going to come along and eat it. Remember, producers do not have to eat other organisms, okay? So they do not depend on other organisms for energy. Okay, so examples of producers are, of course, going to be plants, and your plant-like protist, like algae, and many bacteria are also producers. Like I mentioned, there's chemosynthetic bacteria, but you also have lots of photosynthetic bacteria. Okay, so remember your equation for photosynthesis is carbon dioxide plus water plus sunlight yields glucose and oxygen. So then you have your consumers. So pretty much everything else is usually going to be a consumer. Even a decomposer is actually a heterotroph, a consumer. So consumers are heterotrophs. That's the other term. I don't know if you recall, but troph means to feed, and hetero is different. So you're feeding on a different organism. You do not make your own food. Okay, so they do depend on other organisms for energy. So they must eat. They must consume something. They might consume a plant, they might consume an animal, they might even consume a bacteria. Okay, but they do depend on other organisms for food. They get their energy through cell respiration. So remember that equation, glucose plus oxygen gas yields carbon dioxide, water, and then that energy, ATP. So a consumer that eats a producer, that's going to be an herbivore. So herbivores are going to be your primary consumers, okay? So primary consumers are going to eat first, Okay, so a food chain will go like this. You'll have some sort of producer that produces its own food. Then you'll have a primary consumer. So it's the first thing that eats anything in the food chain or food web. Okay, so it eats first. So maybe your producer was grass and the primary consumer was a cow. Okay, then you have a secondary consumer. Guess what the secondary consumer does? It eats second. Okay, so it eats the primary. So it gets the primary consumer gives the secondary consumer its energy. Then you have a tertiary, and then after that is quaternary. Okay, so tertiary eats third, and then quaternary eats fourth. A quarter is like 4 parts of a dollar. So if you eat the cow, you're eating you are the secondary consumer. You're getting energy from the cow. And then tertiary, if a lion was to eat you, then that lion would be the tertiary. It would eat third. And quaternary, the bacteria decomposers that decompose that lion when it dies would be the quaternary. So here are just some pictures of some of the things we just discussed. So we have multiple consumers here. They're all consuming. So decomposers and detrivores are also types of consumers. They're still heterotrophs because they do not make their own food. They still eat things, they still consume things. So what decomposers do is they break down dead things. When a decomposer breaks down dead things, it breaks it down into something called detritus. So this is usually like kind of part of the dirt. So detritus is non-living, but it's little particles of organic matter. And it's organic because it's going to contain carbon. Okay, so then you have something called a detrivore, like an earthworm. Earthworms live in the soil, and they convert that detritus into inorganic. Okay, they convert it into inorganic matter. And then whatever's left, like the nitrogen that's left over, then the plants will use it, and that's why it would be fertilizer for plants. So lots of bacteria do this, but earthworms do this too. So basically, like if a tree falls in the woods, like after the recent hurricane, the tree falls in the woods, it's eventually going to decompose. So bacteria and other decomposers are going to decompose that tree. And then once it gets small enough and the bacteria is not eating on it anymore, then it's called detritus. And then the earthworms and other detrivores will further break it down. So those are both consumers, detrivores, decomposers. And a lot of times they group those two things together. Okay, so here are some examples of some detrivores, decomposers. Okay, so that brings us to plant eaters, herbivores. Okay, so herbivores are animals that eat the producer. Okay, so herbivores are always going to be your primary consumer if you're looking at a food web or a food chain. They usually have special adaptations to enable them to only eat plants. Plants are much harder to digest, so a lot of the times they have these adaptations to help them chew and digest their food. So anyway, they have these special adaptations. So some of the adaptations that plants are going to have. One example of that is cows. Cows have those giant molars. Okay, your molars are like your back teeth. So that's the kind of teeth that they have. And that helps them chew and grind up the grass that they're eating. And that extra chewing, if you ever notice, they just chew and chew and chew, helps break down the cellulose in those plant cell walls. They also have longer digestive systems, if you ever heard that they have more than one stomach, because plants do take much longer to digest. And they also have special bacteria in their digestive system, and that bacteria helps break down the plants that they've eaten. Many plants often have adaptations to avoid getting eaten. So it's hard to think of a plant having an adaptation to avoid getting eaten, but this has enabled them to evolve and survive through natural selection. So if they have thorns, like rose bushes have thorns, or poisons, like poison ivy, that's going to prevent them from getting eaten. And now some things might be poisonous to other animals, but not to you. If you've ever heard, it might not be something you want to eat. If you've ever heard the plant poinsettias, which is the red Christmas plants. Well, they come in white also, but they're a Christmas type flower. Those are very poisonous to animals. So we don't, as humans, go around eating them, but they are poisonous if eaten. So that is an adaptation to help them survive. So here are some herbivores. Isn't that a cute little bunny? Okay, so then we have predator-prey relationships. So I think we all kind of have a general understanding of predator and prey. So predators are going to capture and feed on a member of a different species. The prey is the thing getting chased and eaten. Okay, so this is called predation. So if you see predation, it's just referring to the predator-prey relationship. So, a hawk might hunt and eat a rabbit, or a lion, might chase a gazelle and eat it. So predators and prey both have adaptations to help them either hide or get away from the predator, or predators have adaptations to help them capture their prey. So one example is the predator, the hawk. If you've ever heard of hawkeye, that's because they have very good eyesight, keen eyesight, so they can see from high distances because they're way up in the air, and they can see way high up the animal or whatever, and then they can just very quickly swoop down and get it, very stealthily. They also have sharp talons to grab their prey and a sharp beak. A lot of times what hawks will do is they'll grab their prey and then they'll take it really high up in the air and then drop it. And then when it drops, it kills it, and then the hawk will get it and eat it. A mountain lion has kind of that beige colored fur, sandy colored fur, and it allows it to blend in with its environment. So that would be like camouflage. So you'll see camouflage as both predator and prey adaptation. So another example of adaptations for predator-prey would be poisonous frogs having those bright colors. So we talked about warning coloration to warn off potential dangers, something to not eat it. And then mimicry, remember the king snake looking like the coral snake, the harmless snake looking like the very dangerous organism. And then of course camouflage. We see camouflage with both predator and prey. Camouflage for the predator, like the polar bear, to sneak up on its prey, maybe the Arctic fox, who is also white. So they both are camouflaged to their environment to hopefully blend in so that they don't get eaten, or so that their prey doesn't notice them as they're sneaking up. Okay, so here are some predator-prey relationships. Boy, that's the circle of life. Okay, and then we have some mimicry going on here. If you recall, we talked about the monarch and the viceroy butterfly in the evolution unit. The monarch is poisonous if eaten to certain organisms, and the viceroy is not. Okay, and they look so similar that the animals will just leave them both alone because it's not worth dying over. Same thing with these guys. As humans, we know that if red touches black, you're okay, Jack. But if red touches yellow, you're a dead fella. Well, animals don't think like that. They'll just leave both of them alone. And then here's some examples of camouflage. Okay, so competition is when organisms try to use the same resource. Sometimes it's two of the same species competing, and sometimes it's two different species competing. And usually the resources are going to be food and water, maybe space for both plants and animals, because plants need space too. Sunlight definitely for plants. And so lots of things we can compete for. So one example of this would be two birds competing for the same food. Maybe they're competing for the same tree to live in or the water supply. And then one species of bird might be more aggressive than others. I hear bluebirds are very aggressive. So maybe they kind of fight off the other bird and shoo them away. I know that's what's happened in my yard. Is the bluebirds have taken over, and they kind of they're really mean, actually. But anyway, Competitive exclusion is when a species becomes extinct because it was outcompeted by another species. So again, that kind of goes back to natural selection and survival of the fittest. So competitive exclusion is when species become extinct. It's when a species becomes extinct because it lost the competition with another species. Now, there's also cooperation. Y'all know what cooperation is. It's when people work together for a common goal. Some species work together to help each other. So that's a great thing, and let me show you some examples. Okay, so here we have some competitive exclusion, again, some competition. Okay, so cooperation. One example of cooperation is going to be mutualism. And so I'm going to talk about that in a second and several examples of that. So keep in the back of your mind cooperation and mutualism. You don't have to know, like, for your test that they're basically the same thing, but just as we're talking about examples. So the next thing we're going to get into is definitely on your test, and that is our symbiotic relationships, and there's 3 of them. Okay, so in general, symbiosis means living together. So this is when 2 species live together. Okay, so this forms a symbiotic relationship. Now, some species help each other, some hurt each other, and some don't really do anything. They just live together. So our first example of a symbiotic relationship is mutualism. Okay, so with mutualism, there is a mutual benefit. Okay, so both species are benefiting. Okay, remember, symbiosis is 2 species living together. So with mutualism, both species are going to benefit. Now, in all symbiotic relationships, at least one species will benefit. Okay, in all 3 types of symbiosis. Okay, so you definitely need to know these. They are in your packet as a major question towards the end, and very likely to see this. You're going to have some multiple choice, but you'll also have some essay questions about this on your test, so make sure you know this. Anyway, so mutualism, mutual benefit. So one example is a bee in a flower. This is a very big example. We see this a lot. A bee in a flower, hummingbird in a flower. So the bee is going to get nectar or food, or the butterfly is going to get nectar or food, or the hummingbird is going to get nectar or food from the flower. When it does that, it rubs the pollen on its kind of fur or on its feathers, and then it goes on to the next flower. When it goes to the next flower, that helps pollinate the flower. So the bee or the hummingbird is going to benefit because it's getting food, and then the flower is going to benefit because it's helping to pollinate. Flowers can't move, they don't just walk, and so it helps spread the pollen. So animals are a major way to help pollinate flowers. So then you have commensalism. So remember how I said each one of these examples, at least one thing benefits? Well, with commensalism, one benefits and the other is neither harmed nor benefited. I call that indifferent. Okay, it's indifferent. It don't care. It doesn't hurt it, doesn't help it. Okay, but one is being benefited. There's a couple of big examples of this. Make sure you know these examples for commensalism. Like I said, multiple choice and essay question. You're going to see it both places. Barnacles on whales. So the whale is giant. It doesn't even notice that it has barnacles attached to it. So the whale is not harmed or benefited in any way. But the barnacles are filter feeders, so they need water to move through the barnacle shell. And so the whale helps move the barnacle through the water for the barnacle to eat the microscopic organisms in the water. Another big example of this is Nemo and the anemone. So you have your clownfish here, and the clownfish is immune to the sea anemone's sting. Usually sea anemones sting little small fish like that, and then they swoop them into their mouth and eat them, because sea anemones are animals. but the clownfish is immune to their sting. So the clownfish is able to kind of hide in the sea anemone, and it gives the clownfish protection. But the anemone, it really doesn't make any difference to them. It doesn't help it, doesn't hurt it. So that's commensalism. Okay, and then you have parasitism, and this is probably the easiest one because most people are familiar with parasites. So again, one species is benefited because in all three examples, at least one thing is benefited. And then the other is harmed or possibly even killed. Sorry, there's 3 L's there. But anyway, so typically the parasite doesn't want to kill the host. It wants to weaken it. Because it doesn't want to bite the hand that feeds. You don't want to kill your host because that's where you're getting your food from. But sometimes it does happen. So parasite is going to live in or on another organism, and that organism is called the host, and it gets all of its nutrients from the host. And hopefully the host is not killed and often weakened. So heartworms in your dog, that's what you see here, or cat. Ticks, fleas, tapeworms, those are all parasites, and those things can affect lots of different animals. Of course, you know that you can get bit by a tick as well as a dog, or other deer. Deer are big to get them. Anyway, so that's parasitism. So ecosystems are organized, and you need to know the organization. Remember how we learned cell, tissue, organ system, organism? Well, this takes it a step further. So it starts out with the organism level. So again, cell, tissue, organ system. Then we start at organism. So an organism, of course, is just one individual living thing, like one mouse or one human or one tree. And don't get stuck on it just being an animal. It could be a plant or a bacteria. That's one organism. So then you have the next level, which is a population, which is organisms of the same species living in the same place. And if you recall, I told y'all at the same time. Okay, so a population, for example, we could say, you got one example here, but I'm going to give you another one. The bullfrog population in Van Cleve, Mississippi in May of 2004. So that would be an example of a population. So then you have community. So a community is going to take it a step further, and it's going to be all the living things in that place at that time. Okay, so again, same place, same time, except now it's all the species in the same place at the same time. And that's going to be called biotic factors. Remember, bio is life. Okay, so biotic factors are living things, living factors in the environment. So if it's a living thing, it is a biotic factor. Plants, animals, fungi, protists, anything that's alive, if it belongs to a kingdom, it's alive, it's a biotic factor. So a community would be every living thing in Van Cleve in that May of 2004. The next step is going to be ecosystem. So you'll hear us talk a lot about ecosystem because ecosystem includes both the living and non-living factors in an environment. So it's still going to be talking about the same place at the same time. So like Van Cleve in May of 2004. But it's going to include those non-living things in the environment. Non-living factors in the environment are called abiotic factors. So remember, A, the prefix we learned means without, and again, bio is life. So abiotic factors are without life. They're non-living parts of the environment. So examples of some abiotic factors are going to be water. Water's not alive. Do living things live in the water? Yes, but pure water is not alive. Rocks are not alive. Dirt is not alive. The sunlight is a very important abiotic factor because plants need it, right? So all those things, the atmosphere, the gases in the atmosphere, those are also going to be abiotic factors. Anyway, so that's the ecosystem. Includes both living and non-living, both biotic and abiotic factors. Then you have the biosphere. Usually when we see the biosphere, it's shown as a picture of the earth. So the biosphere is every ecosystem on Earth. So any part of the Earth where living things survive. And living things can survive almost anywhere, even the inside of a volcano. So it's pretty much going to be the Earth. So these five organizations of an ecosystem or of living parts of the environment, you need to know them in order, and you need to be able to rank them from largest to smallest or vice versa. So again, you're probably going to see that on your test. And know which one is bigger, and of course also know what they would include. Like I said, the ecosystem would be living and non-living, whereas a community is going to only be living things. Those are the two that most people get mixed up. So, ecosystem and community. Anyway, make sure you study that. So this is a picture of something you could possibly see. It's blurry. It would not be blurry like this on your test. But anyway, you have down here, this is the atomic level, like this here is water. I know this is water, and so it would be just a few atoms. And then you have your cells here, and then we have tissue, organ system, which we've all learned all those. Now we get to the organism. And then you have the population. See, it only has that one species in that picture, but there's more than one of them, so I know it's a population. And then here, you have only living things pictured, so I know it's a community. Here, I can see a pond. I can see the water here, and I can also see a mountain in the background. Okay, so I know those are some non-living and living factors in this picture, so that's going to be the ecosystem. And then again, the picture of the whole Earth is the biosphere. So make sure you're really paying attention. If you see pictures like this on your test, or you're asked to put them in order or identify which is which, make sure you're looking, because you will see some abiotic factors like the rocks or the pond if it's an ecosystem.